Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. This is Politics with Roger. I'm Roger. I like to talk about politics. It is November 24th, the Friday after Thanksgiving. Due to scheduling difficulties, we missed a few weeks here, but we are back today. And I promise you guys, I'm going to dump so much information on you, your head will be spinning. And we'll catch you up with all the relevant media narratives, both independent media and corporate media. By the end of this video, you will know what's going on. Great to be back, guys. Again, thanks for tuning in. Since the beginning of this show, which started in early September, I've been kind of hammering home a theme that we are approaching the end of an era. And I call that era the age of misinformation. I think this era began right around November 22nd, 1963 with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And since that time, we've been in a period of mass cognitive dissonance and suspended disbelief in the United States because of the power of corporate media and the authority of information being centralized to very few sources. For example, the FBI, CIA, and of course government officials have kind of a monopoly on the authority of information. But with the rise of independent media, we see that wall breaking down. I like to say historians will someday agree that the age of information was preceded by the age of misinformation, this era that we are now exiting, thankfully. Here in November 2017, we're going to touch up a little bit. It's been 1 year since Donald Trump has been elected president in 2016. And I do believe that the world is actually experiencing a political pivot that we haven't seen in over 50 years. And I don't just mean here in the United States, but also globally. And it's not just Donald Trump. I mean, these movements were all competing and existed before Donald Trump even ran for president. But now that he is the head of this movement that we call Make America Great Again, America First, we could call it a worldwide nationalist movement. However you want to describe it, these movements did exist prior to the Donald Trump presidency, but now he leads it, and now his impact is just mind-blowing. Just in the last 60 to 120 days, I've been observing and analyzing politics since 1998. And the last 60 to 120 days has just been mind-blowing. I mean, and we're going to get into all this, and I promise you all the news I'll share with you will support the premises I'm laying out to you right now. Donald Trump has been extremely effective as president in exposing corruption, first of all, not just in government, but in many large in major institutions, media institutions, in journalism, in entertainment. And even in business in a lot of cases. So much fraud and so much corruption has been exposed just in the last year, and you're going to see much, much more, unfortunately, as more time goes on. Things really were very, very bad in November 2016. Also, we're seeing a complete reshuffle of geopolitics, something that hasn't happened in a long, long time. Again, we're shifting from a globalist footing, I guess we call them, I don't even like calling them the elites anymore, just the ruling class around the world, those who are trying to put together a one world type government, which has been talked about over and over. We won't go down all that. That whole ideology is now on the run. We're seeing a reversal of that. We're seeing nationalism worldwide becoming popular. I mean, it started with Brexit, and then of course the election of Donald Trump in America, and now all over the world, we're seeing people pulling out of these giant trade unions that hand over authority and power to unelected trade unions or institutions like the EU or UN or NATO. You're seeing a lot of countries turn around and reversing course from these kind of alliances. So I think this is fantastic because I thought prior to Donald Trump being elected in 2016, I decided I would vote for Donald Trump precisely because I feared trends of globalism, and I believed that at the time that Trump was the right person to reverse those trends. And thankfully, he has delivered and delivered big time. We'll be covering several areas here. We're going to talk a little bit about how Donald Trump has drained the swamp, or how the swamp is being drained. We're going to talk a little bit about the collapse of leftist propaganda and the rise of independent media. And by the way, the rise of independent media is the main engine driving the end of this era of misinformation. It is the engine that drove the Donald Trump presidency. Donald Trump, he's done a lot of great things on his own, but it's really the rise of independent media that has broken the back of the corporate media monopoly of centralized information that basically. Let me back up. The CIA, FBI, our government basically centralized the authority of information. And for many, many years, people said, hey, if it's coming from our government, if it's coming from our CIA, if it's coming from the FBI, we're going to believe it. Because of the rise of independent media, that is no longer the case. The average person on the street, or I don't know, maybe the average young person, is now cynical of information that comes from these institutions, as they should be. So getting right into it, draining the swamp. We'll start with the Democratic National Committee. The Democrat Party of 2016 has completely collapsed as more and more corruption has been exposed. You saw this starting with Anthony Weiner. By the way, he started his prison sentence earlier this month in November. I don't remember exactly what he was eventually convicted for, but he was involved with multiple underage girls online, and who knows what else. You saw him go down. You see Debbie Wasserman Schultz under enormous scrutiny for what she knows. You saw earlier the Pakistani IT. We'll call them. I'm not going to call them employees. They're operatives. Flipping on the Democrat Party and speaking to the Trump administration. This is the Imwan Awan. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but that's a story back from earlier this summer. Major intrigue. Then you saw Donna Brazile write a book, and basically turning her back on the Democrat Party, raising the issue of Seth Rich, raising more red flags about this whole situation. And I'm sure we're going to hear more from Donna Brazile before too long about this issue. And now just this week, Lois Lerner has come out. I'll read you this headline from Fox News. Lois Lerner warns IRS testimony sealed forever. Warns. Lois Lerner wants IRS testimony sealed forever, fearing death threats. So a lot going on there. You will recall Lois Lerner, the IRS was accused of targeting Tea Party groups when the Obama administration took over the executive branch, and now Ms. Lerner is afraid of the work that she had done at that time, fearing for her own life. You see the Democrats on the run, corruption being exposed at every turn. Believe me, folks, and I think you already know, that eventually a lot of this corruption is going to lead to Hillary Clinton's State Department, and we are just waiting and waiting for all these things to all these dominoes to fall. Piggybacking this draining of the swamp is the sexual scandals, not just in politics again, but also in media. Definitely in Hollywood, we saw the break of the story of Harvey Weinstein and his gross sexual abuse breaking and becoming part of the mainstream narrative. That led to many other stories of sexual abuse in Hollywood. I'm not going to name all the names. I'm sure you're all familiar with it now. But we're just seeing a flurry of sexual abuse scandals breaking all over. It turns out everyone's molesting everybody, I guess, in our politics, in our businesses, in our media, in our entertainment industries. And the media has been beating that up, so I won't review all the names. I will mention in the political world a few important names, because each of these stories, are different. You got the big three stories out there now. You got Al Franken, John Conyers, and Roy Moore. Most recently, these are the stories that people seem to be talking about a lot. Whatever happened with these three men and whatever their situations were, I'm sure that they're far different from one another. And you're seeing this a lot. Well, I guess what you're seeing is the mainstream media, the corporate media, trying to conflate some sexual abuse, or maybe even sometimes just clumsy normal behavior between men and women, and trying to equate and conflate that with sexual assault and turn everything into sexual assault. So there's a lot of craziness going on. It's all being sorted out right now, and it's going to be a lot of time that goes on before we figure out, who's guilty, who's innocent. But you are seeing the witch hunt on now. I know in the case of Roy Moore, I'll bring up, he's running for Senate. His accusations are from 30 years ago. So and then there's a lot of other suspect information about the accusers that have come out. Now, same with Al Franken and John Conyers. I haven't covered those stories a whole lot, so we'll have to see. I mean, it's in this country we're innocent until proven guilty. I know when you start getting multiple accusations against one person, it starts to stack up. But this is what we're dealing with right now because there's just tons of accusations. Some of the people coming out are frauds. A significant percentage of them. So we have to kind of walk slowly. But either way, accusations flying. You guys all see this in the news every day. So it's this isn't news to you, but this is all leading to draining the swamp. And oh, by the way, sexual abuse and even rape of adults, unfortunately, is just scratching the surface. I mean, much more has been reported on in independent media. I'm not going to get into all that today because I want to leave a lot of conjecture out if I can and speculation. But I can tell you it's going to get much worse. The stories you're going to hear are going to get much worse, very much more, much sadder. And unfortunately, a lot of people will be disappointed by a lot of the names that come out from both political parties, from all over Hollywood, from all over the media and journalistic world. It's just, I mean, it's a feeding frenzy. And anyway, the swamp is being drained. This all started with Harvey Weinstein and the collapse of Hollywood and the credibility of Hollywood. And then also, we cannot talk about draining the swamp without mentioning the Republican Party, the neocons, the crony capitalists, the establishment, those of us in the Republican Party. There's a reason we burned down our own party in 2016. It was these guys. One suspect thing, Mitch McConnell came out very aggressively against Roy Moore, piquing interest in a lot of people, suggesting that this might be political. I'm not going to let Roy Moore off the hook till we all know what's going on. But again, Mitch McConnell, part of the swamp, we want to get him out. We do know that the neocon wing, the crony capitalist wing, again, Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, and a lot of the Bush era Republicans that were brought up with the first President Bush and then also George W. Bush. A lot of that coalition is falling apart little by little or dying off. And we're also draining that part of the swamp because you're going to find a lot of corruption involved in the Republican Party as well pre-2016. That stuff hasn't really been coming out a whole lot. Actually, I mean, it's funny, George H.W. Bush was just accused of sexual assault recently. Much more is going to come out about Republicans involved in shenanigans as well. You're seeing it here and there. And I'm not even lumping Roy Moore into that whole group. That's a separate thing. But draining the swamp, it's happening in 360 degrees. And hopefully we'll be consistent and get the right people out and put the right people in moving forward. But that's a huge part of the narrative in draining the swamp. Donald Trump has done well there. And not just Donald Trump, but also, again, with the rise of independent media exposing many of these stories. I mean, people have been calling a lot of these incidents that are coming out an open secret for years. If it's an open secret, why hasn't it been exposed to everybody else? Well, now it is being exposed. It's no longer an open secret. It's public news, and we're just watching the first of the dominoes fall. It's just crazy. When we tell you the last 60, 120 days and the last year's been crazy, it's an incredible time to be alive. The cultural and political changes that are happening are monumental, and this is all part of it. Another thing we want to talk about was the collapse of leftist propaganda of corporate media. And again, this goes hand in hand again with the rise of independent media. And I touched on this a little bit before about how the FBI, the CIA, and high-ranking government officials had what I would call a monopoly on the authority of information. That is, no one really questioned what came out of those sources. And if you did question the FBI, if you did question the CIA, they would call you a conspiracy theorist. I mean, this was a tactic that was implemented after the murder of JFK. They called anybody that questioned the assassination of JFK a conspiracy theorist to shut him up. Conspiracy theorist really is a compliment at this time. I digress on that subject. The rise of independent media, the collapse of leftist propaganda. I'll start with CNN. CNN and Donald Trump have had their own personal feud going on for quite some time. But, you know, CNN has been reporting on this Russian narrative that the Donald Trump administration had colluded with the Russian government to commit election fraud and to steal the election and to it's basically an accusation of treason against our legitimately elected president. And CNN had stayed on that narrative. I mean, you still see stories once in a while, and you still see them still trying to revive it desperately. But you saw that media narrative basically die in the last 60 to 90 days with the introduction of the Uranium One story and Hillary Clinton, actually, and the Democrats and John Podesta, another name I forgot to mention from earlier, John Podesta, selling uranium to Russians. So it completely flipped. But anyway, without getting into that story too much, the narrative here at CNN totally discredited now by serious people who really are out there seeking the truth. People who are out there seeking the truth typically just don't consider CNN a reliable source. Just a propagandist arm for leftist propaganda. We're seeing Hollywood discredited. We touched on that earlier, but the sexual scandals in Hollywood has just absolutely crushed their influence and authority in disseminating information and basically influencing their brand of culture onto everybody else. Now, Hollywood is obviously still very powerful. You see, again, very aggressive campaigns against the nuclear family, against men and women together, that kind of, blurring the sexual lines, promoting transgenderism. So Hollywood is still a very big problem as far as leftist propaganda is concerned. But with the collapse of Hollywood, with the fall of Harvey Weinstein and the subsequent fall, or all the other dominoes that are falling, Kevin Spacey, and again, a lot of the other names that are coming out, Hollywood has been completely discredited. And when they come out and say something these days, it just does not have the same power as it would have had before all this broke. So we're basically seeing the collapse of the authority and influence of Hollywood. And another symptom of, or another more evidence that Donald Trump has completely collapsed the leftist paradigm and the cultural paradigm is the collapse of the NFL. And we all know the story about the kneeling for the national anthem. The NFL challenged Trump early in this issue. And as of today, the NFL is just getting whacked. They are, I think the last I saw, almost down 50% of attendance down for 3 years, or revenues. You'll have to double check the exact yourself. But the point is the trend is going down for the NFL. And I mean, I had been watching football for many years, so I can't say that I changed my habits. But I know that a lot of people that I know personally, and maybe people too, had changed their habits because of this whole kneeling incident. A total cultural shift has taken place since the election of Donald Trump. And again, it's not all Trump. He's not responsible for all of it, but he is leading the movement that began before his presidency, and now we are hitting pay dirt. Now we are getting real victories. Because you know what? Maybe we'll go back to watching football someday, but not if they're going to disrespect our country. And they still haven't gotten the memo, so people aren't back yet, and I don't know if the NFL will ever recover. But anyway, that's a story for another day. The other area, or another area that has just in the last year been, and I could have let off with this, because really the complete reversal of global policy, shifting from a globalist posture and then shifting into a nationalist posture worldwide, again, is a result of Donald Trump taking over as president of the United States and leading the America First movement. He started in by reversing the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That died the day he was elected. and basically you've seen the diminishment of the EU, NATO, us taking power away from that, the United States taking power away from those institutions since we grew those institutions, donate to those institutions. Basically, those institutions were created by the United States, and now those were institutions acting against our interests. So you see Donald Trump as president making the moves to not allow these institutions that we created in the United States to harm us anymore, or harm Americans anymore, and putting American citizens first. So that was a great thing. Now let's just talk about some of the different countries that or some of the different countries and some of the changes that happened. Now, this is the big one, and I can't really talk about this enough. Saudi Arabia, in the last 30 to 60 days, has gone through a 180-degree shift. With Obama as president, the Saudi Arabian royal family and government was very supportive of Wahhabi Sunni Muslims and their alliances. And by the way, ISIS is Wahhabi Sunni. Al-Qaeda, which is really, or ISIS is just another name for Al-Qaeda, but Al-Qaeda, same Wahhabi Sunni Muslims. We're gaining a lot of support in the Middle East during the Obama administration. I won't speculate on why right now, but you can guess why. And there's plenty of information out there to verify all that. Now, with the election of Donald Trump as the new president, you're seeing a total reversal in Saudi Arabia and basically the direction that country is going, and our alliance has been completely refreshed or changed. And what I mean by that is, first of all, let me back up a step here. And I forgot to mention Las Vegas and even JFK in the previous about the collapse of the leftist propaganda. But I bring up Las Vegas because since Las Vegas, it was reported that there was an attempted coup d'etat, an attempted assassination attempt happening during the Las Vegas massacre on the king of Saudi Arabia, one of the princes of Saudi Arabia. What followed was a violent purge of a bunch of Saudi government officials and operatives. I'm going to flash a bunch of news articles here about that. So there was a complete coup and counter coup, or power struggle, however you want to look at it, that happened in Saudi Arabia. And as it turned out, the side that came out on top is the side that is aligning with our president, Donald J. Trump, and putting America first. Speaking about this, we will come back to Saudi Arabia in just, well, actually, the other thing I want to point out about Saudi Arabia is the funding from a lot of the corrupt Wahhabi Sunnis within the Saudi Arabian government has dried up. And the Democrat Party were benefactors from a lot of financing from Saudi Arabia. That's yet to be verified, but that's also going to come out. You'll see that the Clinton Foundation, the DNC, a lot of dirty deals. And I imagine, look, you dig into the Republican Party past, you dig into the past of George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush. I imagine you're going to find a lot of nasty, nasty stuff involving Saudi Arabian money. So that was another big part of this, Donald Trump getting involved and cleaning up that mess and cutting off those revenue funds. Huge, huge thing. Let's talk about Syria for just a second, because I got to go through all these real fast. Prior to 2016, it looked like we were going to go to war in Syria. The Obama administration, backed by the neocons, backed by NATO, wanted to push Bashar Assad out of Syria. The Russians were backing Assad, as were the Iranians. And, this was the conflict that we were having. It looked like that we might be pushing into war very quickly. And now average Americans like myself were hopefully asking at the time, why do we want war with Syria? What does America need to do with Syria? And the answer really is nothing. The real people that wanted to get into Syria were the Saudis, because they want to sell their oil to the East. And the reason the East, other than the fact that they live there, the Syrians live there, want to keep the reason that real estate in Syria is so important is because it's a center point for whether the West is going to sell energy to the East or whether the East is going to sell energy to the West. It's about real estate and pipelines. So the average American did not want war with Syria. Donald Trump took over as president. You saw the Syrian situation de-escalate immediately. What probably happened, I mean, this hasn't been reported. I think Syria is now probably under the control of basically Russia. I mean, Bashar Assad is still the leader of Syria, although he had agreed to step down in the future. Don't know if that's going to happen or what. But the point is that the United States and NATO have completely backed off of Syria, and thank God there will be no war over this real estate. So that's what happened in Syria. Want to talk just a moment about Egypt, and this is a very big story because just today there was a terrorist attack in an Egyptian mosque. I believe that this terrorist attack was a response to what has happened in the last year. Well, what's happened in the last year? Well, we'll have to go back a little bit further than just the last year. When Barack Obama took over as president of the United States in 2018, he was basically leading the charge to oust the previous president, Hosni Mubarak, from Egypt. And by the way, Egypt and Mubarak, although he's not he wasn't a saint or perfect, was allies with the United States for 20, 30 years. So as soon as Mubarak was thrown out of Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood came in. Not a good thing because these guys are extreme Islamists. So Donald Trump took the presidency over. The first, if I'm not mistaken, the first foreign trip he took was to Egypt to meet with new President al-Sisi. And what happened was al-Sisi purged the Muslim Brotherhood from Egypt. So I'm going to say that this terrorist attack at a mosque was a response to the Muslim Brotherhood being thrown out. But what you have here is you have extreme Muslims, Islamists, terrorizing moderate Muslims, if you believe in that term, but at least terrorizing Muslims that are not active in blowing up other people. So anyway, that was happening in Egypt. Egypt did experience a total 180 also in its politics since Donald Trump had taken president. We're seeing chaos in Libya, and this is the fallout from Muammar Gaddafi being ousted during the Obama administration. Hillary Clinton famously quoted as, "We came, we saw, he died," in regards to Libya. And then there's all sorts of accusation about selling arms to Libya. And by the way, there's also accusations about selling arms to Syria, all through the Hillary Clinton State Department. These are stories that are ongoing. Frankly, I would say these stories have been verified to me. I can't explain it to you or verify it to you, but there's enough chatter to me that there's no doubt in my mind that our Hillary Clinton State Department was selling arms, shipping arms to ISIS, and these arms were used in the overthrow of Libya. The chemical weapons were used in a false flag attack in Syria. You guys might recall that story from way back. So I would advise you to look into that yourself if you don't believe me. But all these things have been exposed, again, since the Trump presidency. They've come to light. I guess they're exposed before, but now they're coming to the surface and people are starting to understand just how corrupt, crazy, how many illegal deals were happening, arms sales to people that don't like our country, just corruption on corruption on corruption. I want to talk about Lebanon for just a second because this is where we're going next. Now, Steve Pieczenik, who's been a very reliable source of information, by my opinion, for a long time. He was on InfoWars the week of November 4th, I think on the Wednesday of that week, predicting war between Israel and Iran. But when I say Iran, we don't mean necessarily Iranian invasion, although that may or may not be on the table. We're talking about Lebanon and the presence of Hezbollah, which is a proxy Shiite army for Iran. And Israel, this has been a problem for Israel for a long time. You'll recall the 2006 conflict in Lebanon and Israel. This was really a battle between Israel and Hezbollah, who, of course, again, is a proxy army for Iran. What we're seeing now, and this is just chatter again, but what we're seeing is a temporary, and I don't know if I want to call it an alliance, But you have the Israelis and the Saudis actually working together or wanting to work together to purge Hezbollah from Lebanon. It was I can't say reported. It was chatted about that Iran, or the Iranian government, had planned an assassination of the prime minister of Lebanon, who was tipped off by the prime minister, or by the government of Saudi Arabia. And this is kind of how this all came together. And this is why you see people like Steve Pieczenik predicting conflict in Lebanon shortly. But I just wanted to tell you this story because, again, this would have never happened in 2016. This would have never happened in 2015 because the Wahhabi Sunni Muslims and also Hezbollah were not being, were unmolested. We were not bothering them. Basically, our government was almost backing them. I guess I wouldn't go that far to say Obama backed ISIS and Hezbollah, but other people might. So I'm still trying to report news and trying to not get too far into conjecture and speculation. So I'm not going to go that far yet. But it seems that there's been a complete 180, and the positions of the Sunni Wahhabi Muslims in the Middle East and the position of Hezbollah has weakened significantly since Donald Trump has taken over as president. Oh, and I do want to mention that we do know that ISIS has been ravaged since Donald Trump took over as president of the United States. They've been very quiet about it. ISIS has been pushed completely out of Iraq. And again, you see it pushed completely out of Syria. And now you see the Saudi Arabian government turning their back on, because it's their people. I mean, people of Saudi Arabia are Sunni Muslims. Not all are Wahhabis, but a significant number of them are. You see the Saudi Arabian government pivoting away from Wahhabi extreme Sunni, extreme Islam. So let's talk just about North Korea for a second. A lot of news earlier in the summer about nuclear war. I remember telling you guys 2-3 months ago that there won't be a war in the short term. I can't say in the long term because Kim Jong-un is crazy and he might just, you never know what the guy's going to do. But what has happened is basically he's now surrounded. Trump has been successful in isolating him by aligning with China, using the powers, our allies, Japan, South Korea, to isolate the dictator in North Korea. And basically, we just, North Korea is impotent. I mean, they have the same card that they always have. North Korea is always threatening to blow everything up. We'll fire all our artillery at South Korea. We'll fire all our artillery at Japan. We'll fire our nukes in every direction, and we'll just cause chaos. And frankly, the party that doesn't want war is South Korea, because Seoul will face horrendous damage, or will take horrendous damage if North Korea is successful in launching any kind of attack. So that's actually what has prevented war thus far. Is that South Korea does not want a preemptive strike in North Korea. By my opinion, this wasn't reported. This is just putting 2 and 2 together. As the dictator gets more and more isolated, we'll see where this all leads. He's only got the one card, blow everything up. And once he plays that card, he's done. And if it's one thing I think I know about the North Korean dictator, at least thus far, I mean, this could always change, but I don't see Kim Jong-un as suicidal. I'm sure he's a little bit crazy. I think anybody running North Korea would be, or would have to be. But I don't think he's suicidal. I don't think he wants to die. I think he would like to live many, many more years. And if he hits the nuclear button, that will be the beginning of the end for him. So it seems that North Korea, for the most part, is isolated and contained. So these are just, again, victory after victory after victory here in the geopolitical realm. And oh, so important. So much change just in the last year. And finally, I wanted to talk about the EU. Brexit was a big thing. We saw earlier in the month Germany is now preparing for the collapse of the EU, and this is just victory beyond. I mean, it's just it's such a big thing because the EU is a globalist movement. Trying to make Europe one big nation. You see it falling apart. You saw since the Obama administration and in the last 4 or 6 years, you've seen this Muslim refugee crisis engulfing Europe. I mean, just if you look at Sweden and Switzerland and you look at London today and you look at Greece today and you look at Italy today, this has caused a backlash and now a nationalist backlash. And again, you saw Germany now preparing for the collapse of the EU, and this is victory. This is all evidence, symptoms of a Donald Trump presidency, symptoms of nationalism on the rise. And just moving a little bit more forward, we're trying to wrap this whole thing up. I try to go 20 minutes. I've been talking for 35. Good grief. We've been seeing a crackdown worldwide on child trafficking and sex slavery. Very sad story. I'm afraid we're going to see much, much more news come out about this. I would tell anybody, look, do some net searching about all the arrests that have taken place since Donald Trump has taken president, and then ask yourself, why weren't these arrests happening before? But it's happening all over the place. Huge story. It's gonna seep into Washington D.C. It's gonna seep into Hollywood. And it's going to, and unfortunately for many people, it's going to seep into many of the institutions that we used to revere and love. But we need to drain the swamp, and we need to rid the world of this evil. Sex trafficking, child trafficking, pedophilia, terrible. And last and probably least, but maybe biggest, but we don't know, total conjecture here. There's been a story that we've had our eyes on, but we don't know really what happened yet. Chatter about 2,200 Marines storming CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. This would have happened, I think, about a week or 10 days ago. I'll flash an article for you guys. I found it to be very interesting. So I'm going to keep an eye on that for us moving forward. But just to summarize, with this big information dump, and we forgot to talk a little bit about Las Vegas and how that false flag attack has been completely debunked. I forgot to mention the JFK files, which has Edgar Hoover quoted as saying, "We must convince the American public that Oswald acted alone," basically implying that Oswald did not act alone. So we could dive into that too. This is why the age of cognitive dissonance, the age of suspended disbelief, the age of misinformation is coming to an end. And we can finally enter the true age of information, a true period of renaissance and growth and just prosperity. So I'm excited about the future. It's a great time to be alive. Thank you for watching this summary on November 24th. I will be back next week, so we'll get more back to the weekly news cycle, so there's not so much information every week unless it's a big news week. But yeah, what an incredible time to be alive. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving week. Thanksgiving's over. Happy Thanksgiving weekend, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.